Dr. James H. Cone. Dr. James H. Cone was a theologian, minister, and author. He described black liberation theology as, quote, an interpretation of the Christian gospel. An interpretation of the Christian gospel from the experience and perspective and lives of people who are at the bottom in society, the lowest economic and racial groups, end quote. Now, in an interview in 2008, Dr. James H. Cone said that in the 1960s, he saw his faith, Christianity, imperiled by the growing or block of being, or the importance of it being reduced by the growing appeal to African Americans of the Nation of Islam and the Black Power movement. He said, quote, Christianity was seen as the white man's religion. He said, I wanted to say, no, the Christian gospel is not the white man's religion. It is a religion of liberation, a religion that says God created all people to be free. God created all people to be free.
Yes, sir.
He said, he went on to say, but I realized that for black people to be free, they must first love their blackness. Okay, not run away from it. Okay, not bleach this. What he's understanding is that Christianity, or whatever religion you practice, has to be used as a tool to fight for your freedom and for the freedom of your people, and a tool of liberation. All right, now, for decades, Dr. James H. Cone spoke forcefully about racial inequalities that persisted in the form of economic injustice, mass incarceration, and police shootings. Dr. Cornel West said of Dr. James H. Cone, quote, that kind of consistency is just rare in American intellectual life, to be focused on such unflinchingly, so unflinchingly on the most vulnerable in our society. James Cone was the theological giant in our midst who had a love affair with oppressed people, especially black people. So when he passed away, they had an obituary. They had a big article at the New York Times website on James H. Cone. It's called James H. Cone, a founder of Black Liberation Theology, dies at 79. That's April 29th, 2018 is when that came out. So you can read that full article for more information. Now, when we look at the origins of black theology or black liberation theology, black theology arose from the ferment of the late 1960s as many African American clergy, scholars, and activists, disillusioned by the pace of social change in regard to the condition of the African American masses, moved from the integrationist perspective that served as the touchstone of the civil rights movement toward an affirmation of black power. Now, in affirming black power is not anti-white, it's anti-white supremacy, it's anti-white oppression. Okay, when you talk, I've talked to Bobby Seale, we communicated through Facebook. Bobby Seale, co-founder of the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, October 1966. He said they weren't against white people. They didn't hate white people. They hated white oppression. They hated white supremacy.
That's right.
Okay? What happened was the media tried to make them out to be people that hated white people. Okay, and then they showed the guns that he talked about when you go watch the second series of Eyes on the Prize. How many people have seen Eyes on the Prize? The documentary series Eyes on the Prize. It was one of the best documentary series dealing with the civil rights movement. So there's the first series that dealt with about 1955 to 1965. It starts with the lynching of Emmett Till, August 28, 1955 in Money, Mississippi. And then it ends with the signing of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, okay? Then they had a second series that came out years later that goes from about 1964 through the 1980s. In that second series, Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale are interviewed, as well as Kwame Ture, Stokely Carmichael. Right now on the World Channel, on Xfinity, on Comcast, the World Channel, I think it's channel 287. Some days they're showing installments of that, because I'm going through, I saw it when it originally aired, and I'm going through recording it, because I have the first Eyes on the Prize on DVD. I have the box set DVD. I can't find the second one anywhere. The second one, I would argue, is even more important, because they talk about armed resistance in the civil rights movement, and they actually interview members of the Deacons for Defense and Justice.
All right.
That armed resistance wasn't talked about in the first installment of Eyes on the Prize. They get deep into the armed resistance, and they talk about Malcolm X, all that in the second installment. But when Huey P. Newton was interviewed, he talked about how they backed away from, because the official name of the organization was the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, because it was a political party as well. He said later on they dropped the self-defense part of the name because their offices were being raided, and the police will come in and take pictures of the guns that they had and put that in the media to try to scare white people. He said they didn't tell you that we own the guns legally. Okay, so he said they backed away from using that term self-defense in their name to try to take the focus off of the weapons. All right, now, so if you get a chance to watch that, it's powerful. Black theology arose from the ferment of the late 1960s as many African-American clergy, scholars, and activists disillusioned by the pace of social change in regard to the condition of the African-American masses moved from the integrationist perspective that served as the touchstone of the civil rights movement toward an affirmation of black power, which is dealing with black self-determination, cultural affirmation, political empowerment, and racial pride, and the identity politics of the early 1970s. Okay, now just a quick point, because I got to say this. When they talk about, if you actually study the civil rights movement, right? You study Dr. King, you study John Lewis, you study the different civil rights organizations, things like this. The main fight was for desegregation. The main fight was for desegregation. They wanted first-class citizenship. They wanted all their rights now. And when you look at the Montgomery bus boycott, the goal wasn't to sit in the front of the bus with white people. The goal was to break the back of segregation, first in Montgomery, Alabama, secondly in the state of Alabama, because segregation was written into the Alabama State Constitution in 1901. That wasn't just something that Montgomery made up. After Reconstruction ends in 1877, I teach a whole class dealing with history from 1800 through 1970. Actually up to 1971, when Richard Nixon declared his war on drugs, June 17, 1971. That's when the war on drugs began. With Richard Nixon, somehow people forget that. I don't know how they forget that. But that's another conversation. But Richard Nixon is also talked about in Eyes on the Prize. You got to watch this, okay? I put it, maybe Deacon McConaughey, I recorded some of it with my camera phone last Saturday morning, about 5 in the morning. I was up late doing research. And they talk about Richard Nixon winning the 1968 presidential election. He won it on the platform of law and order, which was a backlash to the civil rights movement, a backlash to the Black Power movement, a backlash to affirmative action, a backlash to the rebellions that were taking place across the country, like in Detroit in June 1967. He won on an anti-black platform. Then when he wins, he says, I'm paraphrasing, he says, we've been spending billions of dollars on anti-poverty programs. We've been spending billions of dollars on civil rights, things like this. He said, he said it's not working and we're going on the wrong road. So when you're going on the wrong road, I say you have to get off that road, go on another road. So he shut down a lot of those programs. Okay? He was a backlash to all of that. So anytime there are perceived periods of advances that African Americans make, there's always a white backlash to that. There's always a white backlash to that. And over the past few years, we've been seeing that white backlash, okay? All right, now, the Black Theology movement was the Christian theological response to an expression of the burgeoning African American self-affirmation that crystallized during the period. The movement came in answer to the fundamental challenge posed by many in the African American community who saw in Christianity the epitome of not only American but also Western spiritual hypocrisy. Okay? Who saw in Christianity the epitome of not only American but also Western spiritual hypocrisy. Christianity's historical complicity in African American slavery, suffering, and oppression, and the occlusion or blockage of the African American encounter with Christianity in the grand narrative of American church history and theology was as its failure to respond courageously, and theology as well as its failure to respond courageously, aggressively, and positively to the ongoing struggle of the late 1960s, read like a balance sheet on the moral and spiritual bankruptcy of the Christian faith. So you saw scholars who saw a need to transform the Christianity that had been taught to them, the Christianity of their parents, things like this, and use it as a weapon to fight against oppression and to fight for liberation. Now, there is a sense in which black theology can be read as an outcome of the larger problematic of Christianity's confrontation with modernity, rendering it more or less a variation on a theme. Classically conceived, this problematic is twofold, involving first the search for justice and second the encounter with science. More to the point, however, is the issue of social justice. In spite of the efforts of some theologians to take the challenge for social justice seriously, European American theology remains strangely and disturbingly silent on the issue of race. And even Dr. King, in his letter from a Birmingham jail, 1963, he talks about how it was white liberal theologians who were telling African Americans, you're moving too fast in this fight for justice. You need to be patient. You need to slow down. The theologian concerned with social justice in the dominant theology prior to the rise of black theology or black liberation theology made only passing reference to African Americans or their plight. Given the centrality of race and its co-committed ideologies in the shaping of modernity, from the role played by slavery in the Western articulation of capitalism, colonialism, and imperialist expansion to American Jim Crow, in South African apartheid, institutionalized poverty, and second-class citizenship in the second half of the 20th century, all sanctioned and justified by the dominant Christianity and grounding in its theological articulation. So what they're saying is there's a hypocrisy here, okay? The words in the religion that says we're supposed to be free, you're trying to use this to justify oppression. You're trying to use this to justify Jim Crow. And if you go and look at the second incarnation of the Ku Klux Klan, the second incarnation of the Ku Klux Klan was in October 1915. After the movie The Birth of a Nation comes out, February 8, 1915. And has anybody seen the original Birth of a Nation? Okay. D.W. Griffith was the director. It was distributed by Louis B. Mayer. And then Louis B. Mayer teams up with Metro and Goldwyn, and they form Metro Goldwyn Mayer Studios, partly with the profits that Louis B. Mayer made from distributing The Birth of a Nation. But it was a movie that had all the negative stereotypes of African Americans at the time, okay? And it takes place, it's on YouTube. You can go watch it. It's a silent movie, so be ready. It's a silent movie. It's a 3-hour movie. Okay, it was the longest movie at the time, the most expensive movie, cost $100,000 to make. Okay, the movie is based upon a novel by a man called the Reverend Thomas Dixon. The name of the novel was called The Klansman. Okay, and for the first 30 days that The Birth of a Nation is airing in theaters, the movie was called The Klansman, and then they changed it to The Birth of a Nation. The movie takes place during slavery. It takes place in South Carolina, Piedmont, South Carolina. It takes place during slavery, the Civil War, which is 1861-1865, and the Reconstruction era, 1865-1877. And what it's doing is, now you have to understand, 1915 is the 50th year anniversary of the Civil War ending, for all practical purposes, April 9th, 1865. The 13th Amendment, being ratified December 18th, 1865, which legally ends chattel slavery. Okay? And it's also the 50th anniversary, 1915 is also the 50th anniversary of the first incarnation of the Ku Klux Klan, founded December 24th, 1865 in Pulaski, Tennessee. Okay? About a week after chattel slavery ends. So, the long story short, the movie shows the Ku Klux Klan as being the heroes of the movie and putting down a rebellion after the Civil War ends, a rebellion of former Union Negro soldiers. And at the end of the movie, it flashes on the screen, this is The Birth of a Nation. Well, this movie helped rejuvenate the Ku Klux Klan because a lot of the early Klan members had died out by 1915. And in a lot of newspapers where they had ads for the movie, the Klan would take out recruiting ads right next to the ads for the movie The Birth of a Nation. All right? Now, the second incarnation was created October of 1915 by the Reverend William Joseph Simmons. Okay, the Reverend William Joseph Simmons, who utilized Christianity as a justification for the Ku Klux Klan. Okay, so you gotta understand this history. All right, now the failure of European American theology to figure in the utter centrality of race fatally compromised its legitimacy and forfeited all pretension to universality. The centrality of race and the elimination of the epithet social from this new proclamation of the gospel effectively and fundamentally distinguished the movement from previous articulations of the social gospel. So for more information, at encyclopedia.com, referencing the Encyclopedia of Religion, they have a whole section on black theology by Matthew V. Johnson. Okay, so that's just an excerpt from it, just to give some background on the origins of black theology or black liberation theology. Now, in an interview with Terry Gross, Dr. James H. Cone explains the black liberation theology movement, which has roots in the 1960s civil rights activism and draws inspiration from both the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X. And Dr. James H. Cone said, mainly a theology that seeks God as concerned, that sees God as concerned with the poor and the weak, end quote. Now, Dr. James H. Cone also comments on controversial remarks made by the Reverend Jeremiah Wright, who is Barack Obama's former minister and a black liberation theology proponent, Reverend Jeremiah Wright. In a now famous 2003 sermon, Reverend Jeremiah Wright charged that an ingrained, abiding racism in American society is at fault for many of the troubles African Americans face, and he thundered, quote, no, 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 not God bless America. He went on to say the rest of it. That's in the Bible, he said, for killing innocent people, right? Now, if you go read the Kerner Commission report, the results of the Kerner Commission report were pretty much about what Reverend Jeremiah Wright said. Okay, go to blackpast.org. I talked about this, when was it? Oh, I spoke to the March 2nd, Saturday, March 2nd, I did a presentation for the Detroit Reparations Task Force. I did a presentation on the case for municipal reparations and the difference between municipal reparations and federal reparations. And I talked about the 1968 Kerner Commission report, and they talked about how it was racism from white people that was at the root of the rebellions that were taking place across this country, and they dealt with the structural racism, and they laid out a series of remedies that needed to be implemented. Okay, a lot of what they talked about sounds also similar to what some people refer to as reparations. I'm just saying, when you go read that, okay, they're telling you then, and this was the Kerner Commission. Have you all studied the Kerner Commission and the Kerner Commission report? It was 11 people, only one was black, the rest were white, and they're telling you this. It was a commission. It was commissioned by President Lyndon Johnson in 1967, and he was trying to figure out what's causing the rebellions across the country. Okay, Newark, New Jersey, Detroit, Michigan, things like this. What's causing the rebellion, and what can be done to prevent them, and how do you solve this problem? So Otto Kerner was the governor of Illinois. He was the chair of the commission, so it was named after him. Senator Ed Brooke of Senator Ed Brooke of Illinois. He was the only African American on the committee. The rest were white. And they're talking about it was at the root of it white racism that's causing these rebellions and the oppression that African Americans are experiencing, the feeling of hopelessness, poor job conditions, poor housing conditions, poor education, all of this. All right, now, let's continue. Dr. James H. Cone explains that at the core of black liberation theology is an effort in a white-dominated society in which black has been defined as evil, in which black or being black has been defined as evil, to make the gospel relevant to the life and struggles of American blacks or African Americans, and to help black people learn to love themselves. It's an attempt, he says, quote, to teach people how to be unapologetically black and Christian at the same time.
Yes, sir.
Okay, somebody needs to come up with a T-shirt with that slogan.
Yeah.
Okay, you can pay me royalties on it. I'll take 1%. Okay, unapologetically black and Christian at the same time. All right. So more information. Read this article here from NPR.org, National Public Radio. Black Liberation Theology in its founders' words. Black Liberation Theology in its founders' words. This is from March 31st, 2008. Okay, now some early examples of Black Liberation Theology, even before the term came about. Okay, one would be the Free African Society. How many people are familiar with the Free African Society in Philadelphia, 1787? And when you go back and study these organizations, these cooperatives that were starting different things like this, you go to the 1700s, we're using the term African. It's not until probably the late 1800s and the early 1900s that you start seeing color. But we're using Free African Society, Free African Union, African Methodist Episcopal Church. You start seeing this Grand African Lodge. You'll see this, and then you go into 1892, the National Afro-American League. Then 1898, the Afro-American Council. These were two of the first civil rights organizations. Because the term Afro-American dates back to the 1830s. Y'all know this, right? It didn't start in the 1960s.
Amen.
And while we're on the subject, the term African-American was not created by Reverend Jesse Jackson. The term goes back to 1782 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Okay? There are two articles from the New York Times that talks about the term African-American is older than we thought. That term goes back to 1782. And even in the 1960s, we were using the term African-American. Malcolm X used the term African-American April 3rd, 1964, in the Ballad of the Bullet, the version that he delivered to Corey Methodist Church in Cleveland, Ohio. He used the term African-American then, and that's 1964. So hopefully we can stop with this myth that Reverend Jesse Jackson reintroduced the term African-American. He did not create it. But the Free African Society, this was one of the first mutual aid societies, one of the first types of cooperatives that we had. Richard Allen and Absalom Jones. In 1787, Richard Allen and Absalom Jones, Protestant black ministers in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, formed the Free African Society, also known as the FAS, of Philadelphia. And this was a mutual aid and religious organization. The co-founders were Samuel Boston, Joseph Johnson, Kate Freeman, Caesar Crancho, James Porter, and William White. The organization founded by these men was a church, it was a mutual aid society, and an embryonic political cell. Because, so slavery still, this is still during the time when you have slavery in some states, many states in the U.S. You have a few that have abolished slavery by now. And they're using the church to organize. Not just organize and help enslaved Africans run away, but also organize politically, also organize and help those who are sick, those who are free need help as well. So they're using these organizations centered around the church to do this. The organization founded by these men was a church, a mutual aid society, and an embryonic political cell. It also contained the germinal concept of the Black Insurance Company. Now, Mother Bethel African Methodist Episcopal Church. This was the first African Methodist Episcopal Church in the nation. It was founded in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in 1794 by Richard Allen. And Richard Allen is a former slave. Okay, so he co-founds the Free African Society in 1787. He goes on to found the African Methodist Episcopal Church in 1794. Now, Allen founded Mother Bethel AME after the church he had been attending, which was St. George's Methodist Episcopal Church in Philadelphia. This church began segregating its parishioners by race. Okay, the perceived need to segregate white and black parishioners at St. George had its roots, ironically, in the preaching of Richard Allen, who had been an itinerant preacher, and in 1786 began preaching a 5 a.m. sermon at St. George. Richard Allen's sermons proved so popular with African American Philadelphians that St. George soon became overcrowded. As African American attendance at the church increased, however, so too did race prejudice. So what happens is you got all these black people coming, and they're organizing, they're listening to Richard Allen, okay? And when you have somebody of African descent who can organize people, command people, and white people aren't controlling, then sometimes people get scared. Okay, and this is 1787. That's the same year that that you have the Continental Congress and you have the drafting of the U.S. Constitution, spring 1787, at the Philadelphia Convention. Now, when the ruling body at St. George's Church decided that African Americans should be segregated and seated in a newly constructed balcony, Richard Allen and his followers decided it was time to leave and start a new church. Okay? Go to blackpast.org. Blackpast.org has about 6,000 pages of articles dealing with African American history and African history, because they have a write-up on the Free African Society as well as Richard Allen and Mother Bethel African Methodist Episcopal Church. Now, when we look at the Free African Society, this organization functioned as both a mutual aid society and club, whose members of Philadelphia's African American elite could socialize and forge business relationships with one another. By 1794, the society had become large enough to accomplish its original goal when members built their own house of worship, St. Thomas African Episcopal Church. In addition to providing assistance to the sick, widowed, and orphaned members of Philadelphia's African American community, the Free African Society also extended its help to the city at large. The society's most famous contribution to the city of Philadelphia was the help members provided during the yellow fever epidemic in 1793, which killed thousands of Philadelphians. Okay, so there's a good article on the Free African Society at blackpast.org. Also, we have the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey, who came from Jamaica, created the UNIA, Universal Negro Improvement Association, in Jamaica in 1914. You know, he comes to the U.S. in 1916. He starts setting up chapters. He's persecuted by the federal government. You know, he's in prison as well. He gets his prison sentence. He gets it commuted. And when he's free from prison, he's deported back to, he's deported from the country. Now, Marcus Mosiah Garvey was one of the most influential 20th century black nationalists and Pan-Africanist leaders, who was born August 17, 1887 in St. Ann's Bay, Jamaica. He was greatly influenced by Booker T. Washington's autobiography, Up From Slavery. Garvey began to support industrial education, economic separatism, and social segregation as strategies that would enable the ascent of the black race. In 1914, Garvey established the UNIA in Kingston, Jamaica, adopting Booker T. Washington's inspirational phrase, "Up, you mighty race, you can conquer what you will." We also know he was a Christian, but he preached a type of black liberation theology. By May of 1917, Marcus Garvey relocated the UNIA in Harlem and began to use speeches and his newspaper, The Negro World, to spread his message across the United States to an increasingly receptive African American community. Okay, and most of the chapters are going to be in the North. During 1917, this is the beginning of the Great Migration, which is 1915 to 1970. 6 million African Americans migrate from the South up north and out west. 1917 is the year that the U.S. gets involved in World War I. World War I is 1914 to 1918. And after World War I ends in 1918, then the following years was known as the Red Summer of 1919. You have 25 major race riots across the country. A lot of these white men are coming back from war, and they can't find jobs. Okay, there are 5 million men who fought on behalf of the U.S. in World War I. Most of them were white. You're going to have some of the African Americans. You have about 380,000 or so that are African American. But what happens is when these white men go and fight in World War I, it leaves a labor vacuum here in this country. You have plants and factories up north that are marketing to African Americans in the South. on the cotton plantations, things of this nature, to come up north for a better way of life and better wages. So when these white men come back home, the jobs that they have are being filled by African Americans and immigrants who are here, okay? And this explodes in a racial explosion across the country called the Red Summer. You have a big race riot you have them in Washington, D.C., you have them in Chicago, that's a big one, July 1919 in Chicago. You have them in Elaine, Arkansas, where you have over 200 sharecroppers who were killed in Elaine, Arkansas. And it was James Weldon Johnson, who just so happened to be a member of Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity Incorporated, my fraternity. James Weldon Johnson is the one who named it the Red Summer because he said the streets of America were flowing with blood. James Weldon Johnson is also the one that wrote the lyrics to what became known as Lift Every Voice and Sing, which is the Black National Anthem. He wrote that in 1899, 1900. Now, for Marcus Garvey, his major audience included thousands of Southern blacks who were then migrating from the shadow of slavery and the plantation to the urban north. Black veterans of World War I were another Garvey audience. Most of them had experienced both French equality and U.S. military bigotry and returned home as militant race men. So they were called race men. They were also called the New Negro. And this was a new sense of pride. It was a new ideology, just like the Black Power movement was a new consciousness among African Americans. Coming back home from fighting in World War I, these brothers were saying, we fought for this country, we shed blood for this country, we want all of our rights now. We want first-class citizenship now. We're not going to deal with the racism, the lynchings, the segregation, things like this. And this is what they were fighting for. So when the Red Summer 1919 happens, many of these former World War I veterans, these brothers are out in the streets in their uniforms with their guns fighting against the white supremacists. Right. The same thing happened in 1921, June 1921, when you had the Tulsa Race Massacre. You had a lot of retired World War I black veterans in Tulsa who were fighting back. And you had a group of about 200 African American men who go to the jail to protect Dick Rowland, okay, the 19-year-old boy who reached out and grabbed Sarah's arm, okay, and rumors spread that he assaulted her, things like this. This is how this whole thing explodes, right? You have the deputy sheriff was black. Dick Rowland is in jail. You got a group of about 500 white men with guns who want to take Dick Rowland out and lynch him. You got these brothers, about 200 of them with guns to back up the sheriff and protect Dick Rowland, okay? And then one of them, one of the white guys says to one of the black guys, what you doing with that gun? Somehow the gun goes off. Things explode from that. Okay, then the next morning, this is when you're going to have the invasion into North Tulsa. All right, now, black veterans of World War I were another Garvey audience. Most of them had experienced both French equality and U.S. military bigotry. Okay, now, they were attracted to Marcus Garvey's cause. The UNIA grew larger still following the race riots in the Red Summer of 1919. Okay, so go to blackpast.org. Go to our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Okay, there's a 10-week online history course called Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school. I teach the class on Saturdays, 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Our next classes are Saturday, March 9th, Saturday, March 16th, March 23rd, and March 30th. Okay, and then we have a few more classes after that. The class is on sale, $80, regularly $130. We do the sessions live. All the sessions are archived and recorded. You can go back and watch this anytime. So even after the course is over with, you can go back and watch the entire class, okay? And instead of 10 sessions, we're going to do at least 11, possibly 12. The course outline, the lesson plans for all 10 classes or 10 plus classes